You're now listening to All Hog Sports, covering all Arkansas Razorback sports, such as football, basketball, baseball, and much more. Now, here's your host for today's show, Sam Stimpson.
Now, I just wanted to start this off by saying, sorry I couldn't get a show out last week. I had some technical difficulties and was very busy and couldn't get the show out because I arrived a little bit back from town late and I had some classwork to catch up on. But this week, we are back in full normal, going a recap of the show today on Tuesday, and then a preview of the Ole Miss game on Thursday. So to make sure to stay tuned for that one. Now, the final score in Athens, Georgia at Sanford Stadium was Georgia 37, Arkansas 0. Really, the big takeaway from this one is the Georgia Bulldogs are elite, and Arkansas just doesn't have what it takes to compete with the big dogs. You know, also a good way to sum this up is Arkansas had 3 penalties in 1 play. If Arkansas arrived with any kind of shot in Athens Saturday morning, they shot themselves with that shot. Dogs were just too good, and Arkansas kept punishing themselves as a result of the Bulldogs. Like, multiple false start penalties were because we played in Sanford Stadium. And when your decibels are hitting like 113 in the student section, that's right in front of the guys who's trying to make a kicker, the true freshman, the whole offensive line, which hasn't played a true SEC road game in one since like 2017. It's hard to execute at that level in a tough environment like that. And outside of maybe Bryant Denny in Tuscaloosa, I don't think Arkansas plays in that tough of an environment this year again. So it was a tough test first, and Arkansas hasn't won an SEC road game in a full capacity environment since 2017. This is a squad that, you know, it's going to take a game, hopefully, to get used to the noise, and then you won't have to worry about it. This was probably the worst offensive line play of the Pittman era, 4+ false starts. The offensive lineman of the week for me would be Myron Cunningham. He did a fantastic job at left tackle. Now, there was like 2 penalties on Dalton Wagner, and I thought it was awesome that he still went in the press conferences and, you know, he answered his questions about what he did wrong and owned up to his mistakes and said he was going to fix it. I think that shows to the culture and what Pittman kind of has built here at Arkansas. But with that being the worst offensive line performance since Pittman got here, you also have to put things into perspective that the Georgia Bulldogs front 7, I guarantee you in like 3 years, if those guys all go to the NFL and they're healthy, they will be starting. I mean, this is just elite. Probably the best defense I've seen personally since like 2011 Alabama. And Jordan Davis, man, he should be in the Heisman front runner. I mean, what he does is impressive. Like, just such a big guy, and he's just running down defenders. And the thing is, Arkansas, you just got to put it in perspective of the offensive line play and know that we won't be facing this again all season. Now, to go along with that offensive line play, a result of that would be the weak rushing attempt. Arkansas runs the ball 30-40 times in this offense, and 29 attempts for 75 yards, 2 fumbles along with that, and 2.6 yards per carry was a rough day. But a highlight from this, I guess, would be the true freshman that stuck out. AJ Green had 6 carries for 28 yards as the leading rusher. And then offensive player of the week for me would be Rocket Sanders. 6 carries for 20 yards, somewhere around there. And he also had a spark to the offense when really nothing was working. He also had a catch for 22 yards. It's really tough to hand out that offensive award just because of how good Georgia's defense held this unit. But I would give it to Rocket. The passing game, though, it struggled until like the 3rd, 4th quarter and a lot of garbage time. KJ really did all he could with the amount of time he got in the pocket and just execution, blocking, things like that against Georgia's front 7. He was 8 out of 13 for 65 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. On the ground, he had 8 attempts for 5 yards, including a couple sacks. I mean, you really can't blame the quarterback for this 0 offense when the line struggled. Linebackers were just eating through blocks, getting easy tackles. Thing is, this Arkansas game in the air is going to have to go through Traylon Burks. It's always been that way. And 3 catches for 10 yards. Him being held there didn't help at all. Now, something from this game that also was a little bit in the A&M game was Blake Kern, the tight end, having a couple drops. And the thing is, he's such a good blocker. His ability in those type of sets are extremely useful. And, in PFF, he's a top 10 blocker, and he's been used in a lot of dump-off situations, and you just can't, have dropping passes, so you want to get his, hands better, and whether that be just guys near him can also be a part of that. But Arkansas really just using one tight end sets with Kernan, a lot of drop-offs here, and when he's able to catch them, he usually gets a couple good yards, so for him to, just be involved in the passing game would be a plus when he's not dropping. Arkansas offense at 162 total yards. Man, the Dogs, they're just so good up front, that front seven. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, they pretty much got ran over. The ball was snapped, and our three-man front was pushed up the field 2-3 yards every single time. However, one thing I did like is they didn't quit through the rotations. They just kept trying, and some plays they were able to shed blocks and get up tackles. I love the effort up front, regardless of the result. Defensive Player of the Week would be Trey Williams. He was getting some pressure off the edge. Really, just the perspective here, getting zero pressure, but you're playing Pittman's boys up front. I mean, these are guys he recruited at Georgia and somewhat developed. A lot of those backups back then. But, these are guys that he has prospects in his system, and, they're shining for UGA and beating Arkansas up front. They're a good team, and they're so much bigger, faster, stronger, just based off, recruiting rankings, genetics, things all like that. Now, Georgia had 273 rushing yards, 56 attempts, and 4.9 yards per carry, and when you see that 56 attempts number, that also correlates with a high amount of linebacker tackles. Grant Morgan had 12 tackles with 1 tackle for loss. He's my Defensive Player of the Week. Barbara Poole had 11 tackles, and then Henry had 8 tackles. I've heard a lot about this three-man front, and that's what Arkansas used all game, and it wasn't effective. There was some four-man front on a couple of the late plays, but Arkansas mainly stick to the three-man front. And the thing is, somebody has to eat these blocks, and I think Arkansas kind of understood that the best way to limit their rushing game would be through the linebackers, and really would have adding a fourth man done nothing. I don't think Odom would have thought that. Maybe they would eat some blocks up, but I think Arkansas was better going with a 3-5-3 in some situations. Catalan, Poole, and then Morgan, sometimes Henry instead of Poole, did the majority of the work on the rushing defense. But again, I think the offensive line is just that elite for Georgia. I don't know if we'll play another one that is that good all year. And then also you have to look at execution too, because if you add a fourth lineman but they're not executing at their level they should be because of how good Georgia is, you're really just taking away from the passing game. And Arkansas has a statistically top 2 passing unit. And yeah, I know that they didn't need to throw the ball at all when they're just running it all over us, but the secondary was pretty solid. The backup Stenson Bennett for Georgia was 7 out of 11 with 6.5 yards per attempt. I don't even know if this is a pat on the back just off of how little did they throw. Arkansas's secondary still been good in the other games though, but I guess they were the best part of this game. Flipping it over to special teams though, disastrous. 0 for 1 on field goal, and I really don't put this on the kicker. He's kicking a long field goal in opponent territory as the student section's right in front of him, who's hitting 112 decibels. Nerves. I get that. I personally would have gone for it with how we were down by 21, but I guess that's another time. The blocked punt touchdown just got ate up front physically, and that was basically the whole story of the game. And the offense also had a lot to do with that as they backed into their own end zone on false starts. You had unnecessary penalties like blocking the backs on returns, return kicks that we didn't get past the 22-yard line. I mean, there's no reason to take those. Just take it, get to the 25. Don't risk the muff punt, which happened once. The special teams player of the week for me would be Reed Bauer, who had 7 punts for 296 yards with 42.3 average yards per punt. Not really much on the special teams side, as it just was an awful day.
Now, for the grades of the Arkansas Razorbacks.
I give the offense a D- just because late we had some stuff that started working out. False starts hurt this team a lot and just wasn't effective and couldn't run the ball, and the passing game wasn't open like that. When you have KJ on for 5 yards on 8 attempts, he can't open up the passing game. That's not how his game is going to work. Defense, I gave a D-. The secondary was the highlight of this game, but they were just whipped physically up front on the defensive line. Special teams, I gave an F. I feel like a broken record saying Arkansas shouldn't have block punt touchdowns, but it's ridiculous. It's not a situation where the Hogs need to be in going into later into SEC West play, and then muff punts, muff kickoffs, shouldn't have that happening either. Overall, I gave Arkansas a D-, and, it's really hard to find some positives in here, but just take a look at perspective-wise. Arkansas's 4-1. If I would have told you at the beginning of the year, you would have gladly taken that. I think Georgia also wins a national championship. It's probably, a little too early to be that perspective. And then also, you got to keep in mind that this is an East team, and what Arkansas wants to do in the West, I bet they had some goal where they want to finish second, third, fourth, somewhere in that area would be imaginable. Arkansas still has that, They are 1-0 in SEC West play, and now they go to face a pretty solid Ole Miss team, and I'll preview that on Thursday. Like I said, though, this team can easily rebound. This is the worst play that I've seen from the team, and they were also on the road in a tough environment. They won't have to play in. Like I said, though, we're getting beat by the number 2 team in the nation. This isn't North Texas, Western Kentucky. Anybody to even compare it to those games is just ridiculous. Arkansas still number 13 in the nation with 2 solid wins. I don't know how that A&M will turn out as they are now unranked, but the Texas win looking better is Bijan Robinson, a guy that Arkansas stopped, is now in Heisman talks. I think what they did on the rushing side of the defense is looking very impressive, and then the secondary continues to be stout. So, keep in mind, I don't think this really means much for Arkansas' season. I think this game will kind of get thrown away in a couple weeks on film. It won't be something that'll be, highlighted. But Sam Pittman realizes what happens, what the future is not really out of the grabs. And we walked out of Sanford Stadium healthy. It's probably one of the blessings Ricky Stromberg tweeted out on Twitter. Nobody got hurt that game. But Arkansas hasn't had any major injuries going out to week 6. That also goes with strength and conditioning staff, though. Now, I'll preview the Ole Miss game this Thursday, so make sure to catch it then. And as always, woo pig suey.
That's all for today's episode of All Hog Sports with Sam Stimpson. Make sure to stay tuned for the next episode covering all Arkansas Razorback sports. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media too. On Twitter and Instagram at All Hog Sports Pod. Like on Facebook at All Hog Sports and Arkansas Razorbacks Podcast. And on YouTube at that same name. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Go Hogs!